when Democrats promised $2,000 relief checks over and over again back during the Georgia races. Let's take a trip down memory lane, courtesy of a great riser, Dems watchdog.
If you send John and the Reverend to Washington, those $2,000 checks will go out the door.
We will be able to pass $2,000 stimulus checks for the people next week.
We'll deliver the $2,000 stimulus checks.
And that begins with the $2,000 stimulus.
When you send me and Reverend Warnock to the Senate, we will pass those $2,000 stimulus checks. You send me and Reverend Warnock to the Senate, we will pass those $2,000 stimulus checks.
They will make decisions about whether we give people a $2,000 check.
We need to pass $2,000 stimulus checks for the people.
We're getting people that $2,000 in relief, direct payment.
Congress should pass $2,000 checks. President-elect Biden and Democrats are all pushing for $2,000 relief checks.
Okay, so while legislators mull over exactly who's going to be eligible for those, Biden acknowledged that yesterday anything less than $1,400, though, would mean starting his term with broken promises. Democratic strategist, CEO of Pine Street Strategies, Don Calloway, and White House reporter for Politico, Gabby Orr, they join us now to discuss. Don, let's start with you. What do you make of that mashup and then the stark reality right now that there's already been negotiations around these checks within the Democratic caucus, lowering the targeting from $75,000 of qualification based on your 2019 tax credit to possibly $50,000? It just seems to many people that, number one, it's taking much longer than I think that they thought. And two, it's like now it's $1,400 and they're reducing it. I may get a lower amount. Will that have a problem in Georgia and across the country whenever it comes to 2022?
No, because Democrats can always say, look, Republicans wanted to get you 600. Yes, we were talking about 2,000, but that was an aspirational number. Obviously, it sounded like they were guaranteeing it, but I think that people understand that, you know, those numbers polled well. They probably sounded really good in whatever kind of focus grouping. And we would have liked to get you to 2,000, but we were only able to get to 400. Of course, it sounds really, really bad when you string it together like that in a loop. But, you know, unfortunately, that was aspirational and they might have overpromised there. But I do think that $1,400 is not significant relief. Heck, $2,000 one time is not significant relief. I'm far more on the side of $2,000 a month like the progressives. But at the same time, it's a lot more than Republicans were going to do, such that it really can't be held against Democrats in a straight up D versus R battle in the fall.
Yeah. Gabby, what is the reporting in terms of how open the Biden people are to further means testing this amount? Because even if you accept, and I don't, by the way, but even if you accept, there's some ambiguity about whether it was 1,400 or 2,000, so we're going with 1,400. I don't know why you're using that ambiguity to give people less, but whatever, let's put that aside. Even if you do that, people who got the $600 checks had a reasonable expectation that they were being included in that promise. So now you're saying, well, some of you, millions of people, tens of millions of people that thought you were getting this promise as well, we're stripping it back from you too. It seems to me like it is a very clear broken promise if they don't at least get $1,400 to the people who had a reasonable expectation in that regard.
Yeah, and you know, the White House is currently trying to make sure that that does end up being the case. So there are some obstacles that they're facing within their own conference in the Senate. I mean, Joe Manchin has been one person who has said, do we really want to give $1,400 checks to every person who is eligible for that $600 check earlier this year? Biden is on the record saying that this is potentially a broken promise if they do not get those $1,400 checks out, and if that eligibility decreases and that therefore excludes Americans who were who received that initial stimulus payment this year. I do think that there is a broad effort inside the White House to use the 51 reconciliation majority that they would have in the Senate to get this through with $1,400 with similar eligibility requirements that we saw in the previous package that was passed. And the reason for that is how popular this is. Yes. I mean, if you look at polling, this is more popular than, mortgage and rent relief and student loan relief. People really do want to have that $2,000 relief payment in their checking accounts, tomorrow. And I think Biden saw what happened in Georgia with Republicans who had tried to get this done and failed to do so, and the consequences that the party faced. And so it is important for at least the president to fulfill this promise.
Yeah, I mean, Gabby, let me follow up with you there because I know you cover the post-Trump right now, which is I've been following with great interest the West Virginia governor, Jim Justice, coming out on TV and in the New York Times this morning being like, listen, Joe, you got to pass a big, talking to Joe Manchin, we need a big bill. Presumably they're falling on the side of stimulus checks. Can you talk about that dynamic and whether he reflects any growing thinking in the right? Because I haven't seen a lot of GOP senators comment on this either.
Well, look, I mean, there have been some Republican senators who have said how urgent and important it is for this to get passed. Senator Rubio is one of them. I know a couple of others have also joined the choir of Republicans who say we need to pass $2,000 stimulus checks, and this should have happened before Democrats took control of the Senate. And I think that is, it's a small but growing number of Republicans who recognize the popularity of this. Not only with their own voters, but with voters that they're trying to court that they lost in the 2020 election. So I do think that, the West Virginia governor is just one example. We're probably going to hear more. And I think ultimately, if Democrats do move forward with trying to pass this through reconciliation, there will be some Republican senators who ultimately sign on.
So, Don, on your point about how you'd actually rather see, and I agree with you on this, $2,000 monthly checks for the duration of the pandemic, how come it hasn't gotten any traction? We see the White House very open and negotiating with the Joe Manchins and the Kirsten Sinemas of the world. How come they haven't shown as much responsiveness to the progressive wing?
Well, I mean, Democrats at the end of the day have to retain the Senate, and there's very few Democratic Senate seats that are not in some degree of peril from the right. So listen, let's be clear. No matter what Democrats pass here, be it $2,000 a month, $1,000 a month, or $2,000 one time, Republicans are going to use it as a political cudgel in the fall of 2022 and call it a socialist thing. And unfortunately, that messaging carries.
Yeah, so you may as well go all in on the socialism if they're going to say it anyway.
A whole lot of white folks need that support, too. A whole lot of people who voted Republican need that support as much as progressives. I mean, the people who would benefit most from Raja Krishnamurthy's plan, from AOC's plan of $2,000 a month are Republicans in very, very deep red states. They need the support as much as anybody does, but they're still going to vote against their own interests with this socialism messaging in the midterms. And I think that Democrats understand that very well, so they can't simply default to the higher amounts, even though we know in our heart of hearts that that's what we should be doing.
See, Don, I kind of look at it the opposite way. I mean, and Jim Justice kind of gives up the game a little bit in West Virginia. He's a billionaire Republican, and he's to the left of Joe Manchin on this stuff. I sort of feel like they're going to call you socialists anyway and say you're blowing up the budget, which, by the way, I think they have a lot less credibility on that issue now. Why not actually deliver for people?
But Democrats are still legislating in the interest of protecting their own seats, and that's what you're going to get out of a Joe Manchin. That's what you're going to get even perhaps out of somebody like
what I'm pushing you on, though, with Manchin in particular, let's just focus on Manchin in West Virginia, is I think if that's his calculation about what his political interest is, I just think he's wrong. Because if you look at the polling in West Virginia, $2,000 checks, really popular. Universal health care actually more popular than the national average. So I don't actually buy the argument that standing in the way or trying to whittle this down or make it apply to fewer people is actually in his political benefit.
I completely understand that, and I think that his campaigning will show himself. If you take your premise as true, I think that he will still campaign to the center right, still spend more time trying to convince the far right than he will campaign trying to organize progressives. And we'll see that in the policy of campaigning toward a more conservative stimulus, even if it's not in his political interest per the numbers, as you're saying.
Well, I think he probably would be better off. I mean, given his own governor, but whatever. Okay, stick with us, guys. We're going to have more right after this.